the duress test. We saw that the paternalist, uh, we saw that legal paternalism can potentially be compatible with respect for people's autonomy in certain cases. Namely, if somebody doing something actually damages their autonomy, damages their ability to make choices, then paternalism can be justified because it's no longer in conflict with autonomy. It actually could be used to promote or at least protect autonomy from in very special sorts of cases. So when we apply that to drug policy, we need to know when the autonomy violation that's involved with addiction could be bad enough that we would be justified in using paternalism. That the presumption against using paternalism, because of it, the danger it normally poses to autonomy, we want to know when we can actually overcome that presumption. So one way of doing that is we can look at the areas of law in which we already say that the loss of autonomy justifies a special treatment under the law. So the obvious example to look towards here is the insanity defense in the criminal law. If you commit a crime but are so out of control of your actions, are so non-autonomous, your decisions to commit the crime are made out of a lack of a capacity to be morally responsible for what you've done, then we don't hold you morally responsible for the crime that you've committed. And so the idea is that in the case of insanity, you have a violation, or the person's autonomy is so far compromised that we accept that it's okay for the state to step in and for the state to treat this person differently. Now, there's a big stretch between not being morally responsible and the kind of loss of autonomy that comes along with addiction, but we can use this as a model. In fact, since insanity is pretty, a severe case, we can look at another kind of defense in which a person does not act via their free will, which is the problem with autonomy, and we don't hold them criminally responsible for the things they do because of that. So this is the defense of duress. Duress is a complete defense to a crime. That means if it's true, you're totally off the hook for the crime. And duress is applicable when you commit the crime out of coercion. In other words, where your will, the force driving your action was not your own will. And so again, we have this, you did not act autonomously when you committed the crime. So the criminal law, of course, has a test for when duress applies. And the idea is that if when we look at the circumstances under which a person committed a crime, say she robs a liquor store because someone had a gun to her child's head, said, "I'm going to shoot your kid if you don't rob that liquor store," and it's a completely credible threat. In that case, when we think to ourselves, look, would any person, the standard is a person of reasonable firmness, but basically, the idea is, would pretty much any of us really be able to resist that threat? I mean, and you're supposed to kind of put yourself in their shoes, or just think, like, what can we really expect of people? And it seems pretty harsh, and even, it seems pretty harsh to expect people to be able to resist, to say, no, go ahead, shoot my kid. I'm not going to rob a liquor store. I just don't want to rob. Go ahead and shoot the kid. Or, to even think, or even to think that you would be able to resist this kind of threat. So in this sort of situation, we go, okay, yeah, it really was that this person didn't act of her own will when she robbed the liquor store, and therefore she's not criminally liable. All right, so how does this relate to addiction and autonomy? Well, the idea is this. Addiction is fundamentally opposed to autonomy. And that's why we seem to be allowed, where we're trying to use paternalism to protect autonomy by criminalizing things that make people addicted. We can exploit that by saying, look, if a person's choice to continue using a drug when she's an addict is like the person's choice to rob the liquor store when there's a gun to her head or a gun to her child's head, then then the addict isn't autonomous, and we can be justified in using the criminal law, using the law to force her to not do things that will make her addicted. So the picture goes like this. You have to think, all right, what's the threat that an addict acts under when she decides to continue taking a drug? So she wakes up in the morning, she's got her heroin needle, she's got her arm, and she's trying to decide whether or not to take the shot. And we imagine that she's thinking she wants to quit and all that, but still we feel that the idea is her will is overcome by the need to take this drug. And so why, what's the picture supposed to be? Well, the picture's supposed to be that she fears the withdrawal, because heroin withdrawal is a really terrible thing. And so if she doesn't take the drug, then she's going to face the consequence of this really severe withdrawal. So the way we can test out whether or not a person who's addicted in this way has lost her autonomy in a way that's a big enough loss that we can be justified in using paternalism and using the criminal law, is by asking, just like we did with duress, okay, is that such a loss of autonomy? Is the threat so bad that we wouldn't blame this person if they committed a crime in order to avoid that kind of feeling? Or to make it more simply, we have a little example, right? Or a little thought experiment. You take all of the symptoms of the withdrawal from whatever drug we're talking about, say it's heroin, and you create a pill that will cause that withdrawal. And then we threaten somebody. We say, okay, if you don't go rob that liquor store, I'm going to force you to take this pill, and it will cause all of the symptoms of heroin withdrawal. And if we say that the symptoms are so bad that we couldn't, that a person of reasonable firmness couldn't resist that threat, then we know that the addict's autonomy is really, really threatened enough that we can overcome the presumption against using the criminal law for paternalist purposes. So then the question's almost entirely empirical, right? We ask ourselves, we just have to find out, what are the withdrawal symptoms like? And if the withdrawal symptoms from a drug were like, being set on fire for like 6 weeks, well, if you were on a jury and somebody said, I didn't want to rob the liquor store, but I had to rob the liquor store, because if I didn't rob the liquor store, they'd give me this pill that made me feel like I was on fire, like, flames and maybe eagles pecking at you and, all sorts of nasty, nasty stuff. If you're on the jury, you think to yourself, well, gosh, could I resist that threat? And I mean, I don't know about you guys, but eagles, fire, that I couldn't. I would definitely, I would give in to that threat. And so, to my mind, that if the withdrawal from a drug really was like that, then yeah, we would say that a person of reasonable firmness could not resist it as a threat. And so therefore we think that the addict really has no choice but to go on keep taking the drug. She has no autonomy in her decision to continue taking the drug. And that's when we know that the paternalism can legitimately step in, justify us stepping in and using the criminal law to prevent this person from continuing to take the drug by presumably banning the sale or possession of heroin.